Hi, my name is Martin Smith. I'm a professor of toxicology and of cancer epidemiology at the University of California at Berkeley. And I'm going to talk to you today about formaldehyde and its relationship to leukemia. And I'm going to talk about a lot of the studies by my colleague, Dr. Luping Zhang, who's an adjunct professor in our school and is shown here on the first slide. Formaldehyde is actually the simplest and most highly reactive aldehyde. It's a very important industrial chemical because it's a cross-linking agent and it's used to straighten all sorts of products, including hair, as you'll see in a minute. It's also a widespread environmental contaminant being produced from automobile exhaust and many other sources. Very high exposure levels have been found worldwide, and it's poorly regulated in the United States and China. It's a powerful irritant. It causes rashes and skin issues, as I'll show in a minute. It's also been classified as a known human carcinogen by multiple agencies, and there is an association between the formation of leukemia or the incidence of leukemia and formaldehyde exposure. So in terms of it being an irritant, there was actually a scandal in relation to Victoria's Secret underwear, where women reported uncomfortable symptoms like rashes, hives, and permanent scarring. She had very red and itchy skin, and it was found that there were high levels of formaldehyde in various bras produced by Victoria's Secret. And so this was an irritating issue, is a major problem with this compound. Now, in global formaldehyde exposure, indoor air pollution is actually the most significant source, especially in places like shopping malls, in furniture factories or furniture stores, things related to modern home furnishings, and also anywhere where you have incomplete fuel or gas combustion, including wood smoke and fires of the type that we've had in California recently. And indoor air concentrations can far exceed actually even occupational levels of this compound. And a very infamous example of this is when trailers were given to Hurricane Katrina victims, and the average was around 0.08 parts per million, but there was actually over a part per million in some of the trailers. And you can see that up to 144,000 of these trailers were produced. And the problem with formaldehyde is it's in a lot of this particle board and all this material, these new building materials. And so it comes out as a gas and exposes people in the process. You also can become exposed to formaldehyde through anything where, for example, you want to iron your clothes. Wrinkle-free clothes have formaldehyde in them to cross-link it and make it straight. And one of the most common treatments for straightening curly hair is so-called Brazilian blowout, which actually uses formaldehyde as a cross-linking agent, which then straightens the hair. Now, you can actually still get a Brazilian blowout in multiple salons throughout the US, and hairdressers have reported these irritating symptoms of eye watering and nose bleeding and headaches. And the compound itself that's used is often labeled as being formaldehyde free, but it actually contains methanediol, which is simply formaldehyde dissolved in water. And as soon as you start to use it and heat it, formaldehyde gas is released. And it's been shown that high levels of exposure to formaldehyde can result from this. Now, formaldehyde is also known to be a carcinogen, and it was first reported, it was reasonably anticipated to be a carcinogen in 1981. Finally, in 2004, IARC concluded that there was sufficient evidence that it causes nasopharyngeal cancer in humans. In 2009, IARC then concluded that formaldehyde would cause leukemia, particularly of the myeloid types, and the National Toxicology Program, in its report on carcinogens, established it as a known human carcinogen. Now, numerous epidemiological studies have shown an increased incidence of leukemia in formaldehyde-exposed medical professionals like pathologists, and also in people who, for example, work in mortuaries or embalm bodies. undertakers. The incidence increase can be up to tenfold in these people. Recent cohort studies in woodworkers and people working with particle board and in the wood industry also shows an increased risk of leukemia. And this association is supported by sufficient evidence, but industry groups still consider this to be controversial. Now, looking at in terms of being controversial, we decided to perform a meta-analysis back in 2009 where we looked at all the studies to date and added them together. And we found that there was a significantly increased relative risk of myeloid leukemia when you pooled all these studies together. So it looks like formaldehyde does cause leukemia. However, there's still arguments against this association. For example, it's been argued that formaldehyde is so simple and so reactive, it can't reach the bone marrow to cause toxicity due to its highly reactive nature. In other words, it can't reach the stem and progenitor cells that are the targets for leukemia that normally reside in the bone marrow. So we decided to look at this further. One of the things that you would think that if it can't reach the bone marrow, it would be that you wouldn't see any changes in blood cell counts in formaldehyde exposed people. So we did a study in Guangdong, China, where we looked at people exposed to high levels of formaldehyde in the workplace. And what we found was that multiple types of white blood cells and red blood cells were all decreased by exposure to formaldehyde in the workplace. This suggests that there is an effect on the stem cells and progenitor cells, and that there is a general decrease in blood cell counts. We also found that in the circulating progenitor cells in the blood of these people didn't grow as well in colony-forming assays, clonogenic assays that I described in previous lectures. And you also found that there were chromosomal changes similar to those found in leukemia in these CFUGM progenitor cells. All of this suggesting that mechanistically, there was a mechanism by which you could form leukemia from formaldehyde. So does it have to reach the bone marrow to produce these effects? That's really the next very important question. It's still a question about, can it really make it there, even though we see this lowering of blood counts? Could there be another explanation? So the traditional idea is that the chemical has to go to the bone marrow, hit the stem cells and progenitor cells and stop the differentiation of the blood. But there are also blood cell progenitor cells circulating in the blood, and we know the formaldehyde can make it there. But we also know that within your nose, you've got bone here, and that there are nasal and oral stem cells in this area here. And most recently, an amazing study from UCSF has shown that there are actually stem and progenitor cells which reside in your lungs, which we know that formaldehyde, if you breathe it in, can make it to. So the latest idea is that it doesn't need to make it to the bone marrow. It can make it to either your stem cells in your nose or your stem cells in your lungs. So can we prove that? This is the study from UCSF by Mark Looney and his lab, which showed that there are progenitors which are in the lung, which make the blood, and published in Nature in 2017. And so we have used an experimental model in work done by Yun Zhao and Laura Magana in our lab and led and directed by Luping Zhang, that has exposed mice, actually in work originally done in Wuhan in China, where they're exposed to different levels of formaldehyde. Lung, nose, marrow, and spleen was isolated. Colony-forming assays were done, looking at CFUGM and BFUE as a measure of hematotoxicity. And what was found was that in both cultured cells from the olfactory mucosa, that's the nose, and from the lung, you could see a decrease in burst-forming unit erythrocytes in both the lung and in the nose, and also in the colony-forming unit GM in the precursor cells to neutrophils and macrophages. So progenitor cells in living mice were damaged by exposure to formaldehyde. And this paper is in press in Archives of Toxicology. So in conclusion, mechanistic studies in mice show that formaldehyde can damage blood and stem progenitor cells in the nose and the lung. Biomarker studies that we've done in China show effects on the blood formation and chromosome damage, suggesting direct effects on progenitor cells in humans. And the epidemiology studies, when pooled in a meta-analysis, show an increased risk of myeloid leukemia. So overall, we consider that the evidence indicates that formaldehyde causes leukemia. So I want to thank Luping Zhang especially for this tremendous work that she's led in our group here at Berkeley, and colleagues who have helped us with this, including those at NCI and those in China, Zhaojiang Tang and Laolu Li, and also in Wuhan at the Chengqi Wei and Yang Shu, and they're great postdoc in our lab, Yun Xiao, who done a lot of this work. So thanks very much, and hope to see you again.